simple way to burn someone out is to give them a lot of responsibility and feel like they have no choice but to keep doing it. I've had conversations with officers who say, Hong, I am working as many hours a week as I can, but I'm not getting promoted. What more do you want from me? For this officer, promotion means quantity of work. I'm already doing maximum quantity of work. How come this is not reasonable? And I had to explain to them, the fact is that if I promote you now, like I know you're achieving good work and I know you're delivering well. What I actually want you to do is I need you to take a step back, build skills, get to a place where you can deliver similar levels of impact without having to max out your day. And that means you are going to take some of the hours that you are spent working on deliverables for me and focus on your development and skills. And then over time, you will grow. Because if every promotion means adding 2 hours to your workday, you run out of hours quickly. The only way to grow is to build skills. But that means sacrificing some stuff in the short run.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, Hongyi, good to see you back again.
Good to see you too, Jem.
I think we caught up for sequel because you've been writing a series of LinkedIn posts about performance management, promotion. And then I was like, oh, this is really good. And you stopped writing.
I've taken the George R.R. Martin hiatus. You have ideas, but you need time to put them into a form that you're proud of.
Totally understand. So I was like, wait, where's the next chapters? I thought this would be a good way to go through some of those posts, maybe from a bottom-up perspective, but also talk about some of it in our real lives as well. So
course,
it'll be fun. Yeah. I think we will link in the description, obviously, the LinkedIn posts that you've done so that people can dive deeper. But I think they were about performance, measuring performance, promotions, and also to some extent hiring and retention and burnout, all those different dynamics. Lots to dig in. I think that's interesting because everybody belongs to some organization that measures performance. At job, I have to go through a performance review every 6 months. And then you're making me remember about primary school and secondary school, academic performance.
Singaporeans are aware of performance being judged their entire childhood.
The worst part is there's some dinner conversation. Someone's, so what was your PSLE? I'm just like, what?
I know when you tell your foreigner friends that the government asks you for your PSLE when applying for a job in your primary school grades, you're like, are you crazy? Like, why does anyone care?
Because I was just playing a lot of computer games.
I know, I was not a model student.
So we were hanging out at the time. Let's talk about it, which is obviously there's so much talk about all of that. But I think the first question that I got to ask is a philosophical one, which is, what is performance?
That is a good question. The most correct answer is that it depends on what you're trying to do. Seemingly trivial point that I found a lot of people miss when they're trying to run their organizations. If you ask anybody, do they want their organization to be high performing? They will almost certainly say yes. But then when you ask, perform at what? A lot of times they haven't thought about it. I think there's a kind of implicit, high performing organization, we're fast, we're efficient. But a lot of people skip that first step of really just defining what does it mean to be high performing. And once you skip that step, everything you're doing downstream is just vibes because you're not clear on this goal. And I'll give you an example. Conversations with the product teams is about tracking metrics. And a lot of teams are like, should we track BAU, MAU, total users? Should we track like revenue? What should we track? And my answer to them is, what are you trying to do? Because to give you an example, let's say you're working on one of our AI tools, Pair, to be like the best damn AI tool for a government officer it could be. Is the objective of it to not be the best AI tool ever, the most powerful one, but just to be pretty simple so that a lot of government officers can get like a very introductory usage of AI? Is it to fulfill a niche in the market that other AI tools and the commercial industry is not filling? These could be reasonable objectives. Each would be a different measure, right? If trying to be the best AI tool for government officers you could possibly be, then you would compare like the performance of whatever you built versus Claude and ChatGPT and all these other models and try to beat them. I don't think we should be in the business of doing that, but if that's what you're trying to do, that's what you would measure. Similarly, if you're just trying to get government officers familiar with AI, but not necessarily be the pro tool that they eventually use for the whole career, then you're measuring monthly active users, people who are using it somewhat. And it doesn't really matter whether you use it like 10 times a month or 1 time a month. You just want to build familiarity across the public service, which is a reasonable goal. That is the root of actually where a lot of organizations fail, because the complexity of everything else you're discussing in terms of how you like, do your performance management, promotions, and strategy, all this really comes to a disagreement, because you never kind of sat in a room and actually hammered out. It doesn't have to be a single dimension, but what does it mean to perform? I do think this is one of the challenges with why public service organizations tend to be less efficient than private organizations. Because in private organizations, even if you do not do this exercise, even if you do not sit down and have a philosophical debate about what your company is trying to do, you have one default set for you, which is profit. Bottom line, if a company doesn't make money, it doesn't exist. The problem in public service is that because you don't have that bottom, it's not that private companies are better at having these deep discussions, but it's that for public sector, if you don't have that discussion, then suddenly there's no floor. Suddenly you're just chasing either what people are complaining about on social media, or what some of the bosses are upset about, or what your peers are upset about, or what your staff are complaining about. And there's all these different dimensions. And it's not that any of them are particularly wrong. It's that if you do not have that anchor, you get pulled in different directions and end up not performing because you never defined what you perform at. Yeah.
I totally agree, because I've done startups, which is do or die. You have to get revenue and growth. But I've also done social enterprises, right? And it is a weird mixture of both, where you're like, okay, you want to have profitability, but you don't have too much profitability because you're served. And then there's a huge argument internally.
People latch on to profit as the key determinant, but I think profit is just a clear indicator that is useful in environments where you don't have profit. As long as there's a clear indicator of performance, you get good organizations. Sports is a good example. When you win games, you get money. Therefore, people try really hard to be very good at delivering on what is considered performance. One of the things that always surprises me when Olympics comes around, which is even for sports which don't actually have that much money in, and all the people participating are amateurs, when the measure is clear, you learn about all these weird esoteric sports that different countries do. The people doing it are really good at, and they have figured out all these tips and tricks to perform better because it's clear when they do. Another good example is speedrunning video games. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, of course.
You have people who play video games normally, and then you have the people who are like, I want to finish this game as fast as possible. Whether or not that is a good goal for society is almost irrelevant. Like, the fact that there is a very clear and substantial measure that like, oh, you are the fastest at finishing like Super Mario Sunshine or Hollow Knight or whatever video game you're talking about, they will find like they are not being paid. There is almost no money in this beyond a bit of streaming credit. But they will find every single trick and weird esoteric, at this time of day, if this particular thing lines up and you get the right RNG seed, you can jump and hop from this level. And it's crazy what kind of efficiency they find out. But that comes about because, we came to a common agreement that performance was measured by this, and we would just go all out for it.
So what I'm interested in, of course, is that metrics that are easily measured becomes the thing that everybody manages towards, right? For example, profits are easy to measure, so people manage towards it. I think other ones, costs, like budget or department costs, tends to be something that people manage towards. So how do you think people should think about defining the right set of metrics or approaches?
So I think you need to start with what is the story you are telling about what your success looks like. So put the metrics aside for a moment. They are important. In a paragraph, explain to your family or friends what you're trying to do. Are you trying to make all government websites really good? Remove paper forms from the government? Protect people from scams by putting a filter on their phones? You need to describe in a paragraph what you are trying to do. Look at that with a straight face and say, yep, that is correct. If other people look at it and be like, yep, I understand. Once you have that written down, you have a semantic objective. Then you can see what is the set of metrics that you think roughly represents that. I know there's a lot of focus. A lot of people talk about North Star metrics, the one number that you all chase, which I agree is very powerful if it lines up nicely. But what I found is that in more complex environments, or rather with more complex objectives, actually, it's very rare that you're so lucky that there's one number that measures what you're trying to do. I prefer 3 to 5 numbers. Hold yourself accountable for what you're trying to accomplish. I'll give you an example. The way I approach this exercise is by thinking, what's the obvious thing we need to track? Then ask, how can this number be really high and then we're still doing a bad job? Then you have something else. Then you ask, how can these 2 numbers be really high and you're still doing a bad job? Then you add something else. For example, Isomer is our website building tool for government. Our mission for Isomer is to make sure there are no crappy government websites. The crappy government websites are a well-known thing in every country all across the world. Our job is to try and make sure there are no crappy government websites. So what's the first metric that you would look at? The obvious one, people would be like, oh, how many websites is Isomer on, for example? Okay, So let's say this was really high. Let's say Isomer was on 100% all government websites. How could this be the case, but you're still doing a bad job? Are the Isomer websites any better? If you just replaced everything, but your website sucks still, that's no good. So you need to track like, okay, do people find the websites usable? Okay, let's say the websites are usable and it's across all government websites. Is that good? Maybe, but maybe the websites aren't reliable. Like you keep going there and then you have bugs and they look very nice and they're very usable. Okay, so you measure something about the usability and then something about the reliability of the websites. Uptime or bugs reported or things like that. And you say, how can these three numbers be good and it still be bad? Maybe that's all true, but it's super expensive. We hire $1 million of developers to pour over each website and therefore it's not very cost. Okay, so then you have to track cost. And this is a very fancy way of going about you're trying to find the high order bits. For data scientists, you're trying to find primary support vectors that describe your performance. You will never get to a place where you can handle every scenario, but you're trying to get to a place where if all these, let's say this collection of 5 numbers are good, it is exceedingly absurd that it is doing a bad job. That's the way I think about it. You come up with your first answer. Once you get more than 10 different metrics, everyone just like look at it and I have no idea what to look at. This is all meaningless to me. The whole point is to give clarity to the team about what they're accountable to.
We're approaching the problem from 2 layers, right? Which is the individual and small team performance is clear, like what needs to be done. And from a leadership perspective, what are the top 5 metrics? But at the organizational level, especially for large organizations, something gets lost in translation between like small team performance to group performance, and then metrics also that the North Star collapses by the time it reaches the small team. So it's almost like this blob in between that's confusing. Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes people have about metrics is thinking that the 5 metrics you agree upon are the only metrics that you should look at. Those are more like a contract. So the way I put this is in OGP, we've got about 40 product teams building different things. The 5 metrics for each team that I look at are what I, as a stakeholder who does not have time to dig in a team, say, you deliver to me. And as a team, this is what you're ultimately delivering. But in order to get these 5 metrics, you have to have a deeper understanding beneath that about what you're trying to do. And I have to also have a broader understanding above that of what these 5 things are adding up to. Does that make sense? So I'll give an example. Going back to our website building tool for government. I care that the websites are online and that they're good and that they're cheap and we have enough of them that we're making an impact. Now, that's what the team delivers to me, but the team should internally track things like server errors, security reports, things that they, as the experts in their field, know more about to deliver the outcome I care about. They track deeper things from there. I think that's the first part, which is that a lot of times people get caught up, and when you agree on this, that just means that everyone only cares about this. I think this is the common interface that we go. And so that beneath that, the team knows that's where they start and then they go down. I don't have to waste time micromanaging them because you agree. And that way they have the freedom to innovate, to figure out like, what are the right things to look at in order to achieve this objective. You have coupling based on outcomes rather than behavior, as it all gets larger. For a line to be straight, you need 2 points. If I, as a boss, only tell you what you need to know, and you only tell this person what they need to know, then if you were to take ice cream sticks and stick them together like this, mechanically it's flimsy, right? Because the pivot point is like very G, and yes, that's what you care about, but it can swing this way or that, and this one can swing this way, and this one can swing this way. So I think it's important. What I found to be useful is what I call overlapping visibility. You obviously tell the layer below what they need to know, and they should tell them what they need to know. The person 2 levels below, you should have visibility into what they're doing, and they should have visibility as to your goals. That way, instead of having this 1 by 1 flimsy pivoting chain thing, which can't have rigidity, you have overlapping visibility and accountability structure like that. So it creates, it's not perfectly rigid, but much more rigid than single point anchoring.
I think it's resilience.
Yeah. So they understand the thing they're held accountable to, but they also understand the like human, hey, common sense, let's check, is this actually achieving what your higher level objective is, rather than just like flopping all over the place.
Yeah. Are there more effective versus less effective communication practices that help this cascading? Lots of stuff gets lost in translation along the way.
More or less. I am no expert in communication. I would not say this is my particular strength, but the one tip that I found to be very useful as someone who is not particularly good at communication is just to be explicit. It's called signposting, right? So it might seem a bit awkward, but I have found that if you are giving advice, say, this is just a suggestion, and then you say the suggestion, or if you want something to be done, say, to be clear, I'm expecting this to be done. It feels a little bit contrived, but I found that it is far better to just assume low context and be explicit about what you are trying to do, as opposed to hoping you are signaling in the right subtle way that everybody gets it. So even when you're having a conversation with a report and they're trying to give some feedback that you think will help them improve. If you have a well-established relationship, you can just talk and it's fine. If you don't have a very well-established relationship, the person come away from that with all these thoughts in their head of, oh, why did they bother telling me this? Am I going to get fired? Or is he not happy with the project? This is not supposed to be done. You can't stop that entirely. But if you think the project is going well and it's just a thing to improve, you'd be like, hey, to be clear, I think the project is going well. I think these things are going well. These things are good and congratulations. But I do think there's an opportunity to do some things here. Does that make sense? I'm just telling you this because while I think you guys are doing a good job, it feels clunky to talk that way. It is better than the confusion that arises if you don't.
Exactly.
There's a lot you can go through in corporate communication structures, but I found that being explicit solves so many problems.
And one of the communication mechanisms is the performance review system, right?
Yes.
Which is very structured, set time point. There's a lot of stuff writing on it, like your compensation, bonus, promotion. One of your LinkedIn posts dove deep into it. I think what's interesting to me at least was, I think you also mentioned not only a top-down evaluation, but also a self-evaluation, a peer evaluation. You mentioned several other components like project metrics. I'm curious about how you think about performance review systems.
Yeah. So I think it is important to understand that for all the kind of like arcane mechanisms and rituals of performance management, ultimately all you're trying to do is make sure that one, you have the right information, two, your standards are reasonable, and three, you are applying them consistently across your team. Because at the bottom line, performance evaluation is not this like weird, like magic ritual where you get people to write the right words and you sit around and you mutter the right things and you talk about deliverables and somehow magic pops out the other. No, it's, at the end of the day, the question is, what does your organization want? How much are each of these people delivering towards that goal? Recognize them accordingly. So if your organization needs people to be software engineers, great, then you see whether they're delivering their software engineering work and you track that. If your people need your software engineers to be much more user-centric and driven, then you measure that. Performance only makes sense in the context of an objective. Measuring performance outside of an objective doesn't mean anything. And so because people ask me like, oh, is this guy a senior engineer, a lead engineer, a staff engineer? I think we get asked sometimes to evaluate other people's performance. I can give advice and 2 cents worth, but fundamentally, you know what you're trying to achieve. And I therefore cannot measure people towards your objective because I don't know what your objective is.
Right.
The end goal of performance management is, as an organization, I want you to be doing your best to help me achieve my organizational goals. As an individual, if you just do your best, you won't do it perfectly, but if you do your best to achieve organizational goals, you will get recognized. You'll get the performance recognized, whether it's through compensation and bonuses and things like that. That's a separate matter, but that's it. That's all it's trying to do. Everything else, manager writing the eval, peers writing evals, project metrics, self-eval, all of this is asking, are we making an informed judgment? If you as a manager are working with a small team and pretty much everything that everyone's doing, great. I think that's enough. You just look at that, give some performance, that works fine. As it gets larger, you forget or have recency bias or like you remember the most recent project. So you just ask people, hey, just write all the things you're doing so that at least I know what you think you're working on, then I can take a look. As your teams get larger and people have to work with each other, you want to make sure that you as a manager have a view of what people are doing, and then you have your peers have a view of it, and then you have the project metrics, and you can choose how much effort to spend on each of these things or like how much time you want to spend doing each of these. Because at the end of the day, all they are is just information for where you think it might go, like what you need to know to make a sound evaluation. If the manager just makes a value judgment themselves, then it's unsurprising that people optimize for optics to their manager. If you have a self-eval, then there'll be a bit less pressure to do that because people have the confidence that, okay, I don't have the manager to have me on the top of their mind, but as long as I can document their work, they can verify it, that's good. If the team gets a bit larger, then people might optimize for their own work and own deliverables, but at the expense of their teammates. And if you get the peer feedback from it, because every manager obviously wants their team to work together and help each other. No one wants their team undermining each other. So you need a peer eval mechanism so that when that happens, you have some signal. Now, obviously, you don't want your team to avoid conflict. You want people to have discussions and disagreements to make the right decision, but you need to have some signal to have that in. And as the org gets bigger, anyone who runs a small company knows this, ultimately, you need to look at client feedback. Even if the team is really doing good work and you think they're doing good work and you're happy with each other, but every client who they serve is not happy, there's something going wrong. There's a lot of different mechanisms you can look at. I think self-eval is important. I think peer evals are important. I think looking at the project metrics are important. But the end goal is just to inform your decision. One trick we do is make sure people write their self-evals before we ask for evals so that the evals see the self-eval when they're writing it. As a manager, instead of me having to like fact check every single thing is written in the self-eval, if there's something completely like the person and the team knows that if you write something complete nonsense in your self-eval, and I think this is something we need to train out of people when they first start working for us, which is that most people, when they write their self-eval in other companies, have been trained that if you are not super self-promoting in your self-eval, you will not get promoted. It's like a creative writing exercise. But I found is that by having people write the self-eval first, and then when people have to write their peer evals, read the self-eval, then write their peer eval, if there's anything bullshit in the self-eval, it gets called out. People writing the self-eval, knowing this will happen, are far more honest and far less likely to be bombastic about their impact.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a bit of like prisoner's dilemma, which is if in a system where you get to boast about achievements, you have to be bombastic as well.
Exactly, and it just ends up all nonsense.
Because otherwise we're both, if I am factual and he's bombastic, then he gets promoted.
You can wag your finger at people, but really you need to design a system that breaks this down. I found that peer evals are a good way of doing it. And then you look at project metrics just to make sure that teams are not just happy with each other, but actually delivering.
And I think the performance review cycle is a very emotional affair, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a writing exercise, a creative writing exercise, but even for myself, when I'm writing my own self-evaluation, I feel emotional. And then when I'm reviewing other people, it's very emotional and there's a lot of subcurrents happening. So any thoughts about that?
One of the most important things you can do, I know why people avoid it, understandable, but not doing it is the fastest way for your organization to get dysfunction. This is something I had to learn the hard way. When we first started doing performance evaluations, my theory was that the government performance evaluation system wasn't particularly robust. It was classic one, just your manager gives you a rating at the end of the year, which is okay, but has all kinds of dysfunctions I talked about previously. So we came up with a robust performance evaluation system. We did it every 6 months. You would write your self-eval, and not just your peers, but like every single person, like we just got everyone to write their thoughts on everyone else, which was a lot of work.
Wow, that's a lot of writing.
30 people writing. The idea was to get the information from the team. It took a lot of work. One of the things that, if you ask people about OGP, is that there is a lot of performance pressure. Compared to most of government, where people would say that, yeah, most of government doesn't really have that kind of high-performing culture. The extreme performance pressure is a good thing. The challenge I had was that even my well-performing officers started burning out because being judged all the time melts your brain. It's not their fault. It's just as a human that melts your brain. I needed to figure out how to exert some performance pressure, but not create the anxiety of people being doing this all the time. So there's a few things I've learned. One, I think every 6 months, while is doable, is very stressful for people because practically speaking, it takes a couple of weeks and it's very, I think it was just very expensive from an emotional perspective to do this every 6 months. What I found is you may not have a formal performance cycle every 6 months, but you should have performance conversations early and often with your team. Avoiding performance conversations until the evaluation is painful. If every 3 months you have a sit down chat with your manager, what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and like even going to performance review season, you have not exactly, but like a rough idea as to how you're doing and what the pros and cons are, it dramatically reduces the anxiety. Firstly, people then feel like they have control. If I'm silent the whole way and then I give you a judgment, it is very hard to steer and be judged at the same time. Whereas if I have that performance evaluation outcome, and then in the meantime, I'll be like, hey, you're doing well on these things, but this is some things you improve, or hey, actually, we think you're underperforming, but like it's halfway through the cycle. If you pick up these things, you'll be fine. People feel more empowered and able to steer back. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of things we're trying to figure out. I'm trying to reduce the time people spend worrying about this as well. But yeah, I think it is an important mechanism. And what is more important is that it is not the itself, but like the fact that there's going to be an evaluation at the end and you know what it's going to be about allows you to have conversations all along the way to get people on the right track.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that makes it more loaded is tied to promotion, compensation, or bonuses. So the more money I get, or the better the title, the more value you're assigning to me as a person. But what's your philosophy on that? The linkage between performance and compensation?
I want people thinking about, will this action help achieve our goals better? And as long as they do all of that, then feel the confidence that the compensation will be taken care of. There's a longer discussion about designing roles and structure and how to pay competitively, but fundamentally, you need to come up with some kind of stereotypical role that someone plays, calibrate to the market, and recognize when they do things beyond that role that are valuable. Maybe I can share the core challenge I have with this and one of the mechanisms I designed around it. The problem with almost every big company has some kind of career ladder, junior level, senior level, manager, director, whatever you go. And then they write descriptions for each of these levels. This is very valuable because it gives people a sense of direction as to what they need to be learning and where they need to go to. This is very constraining in that it makes you feel like if you don't fit the cookie cutter mold, it's not going to be good. And actually, when you work in an organization where everyone's trying to fit their mold, it makes it hard to do anything. Trying to get someone to help with something that isn't explicitly in their job description is like, why would I spend time doing this? That's not what I'm going to be recognized for. So great that it gives direction, bad that it like soft straitjackets people. what we've come up with is mechanism schema plus. If I have a designer, for example, and they're a really good junior designer, but we don't think they're quite ready to be a senior yet. But they spent a lot of time helping the ops team. They took the initiative to learn some engineering and let them work well with the engineers and help them deliver better. You can't say they're a senior designer because they did engineering work. That's nonsensical, right? If someone's a senior designer. But you want to recognize them. To me, there's mechanisms. If someone goes outside of their role and delivers impact, even if it's beyond their current function, they will get recognized. Rather than calling you a senior designer, we will say you are a designer plus or something like that. So that there's a means to some flexibility that you can recognize people for, because that's exactly what you want. You want your people just not thinking about what's my job. You want people thinking about where can I be helpful. You want people to be able, you have a core thing that you mostly do, but if they do something slightly different, firstly, get assured they'll recognize for it. And very importantly, if they keep doing it, that actually can become how you make new roles. So for example, we had an engineer who worked with us for a while, but he spent a lot of his time helping out with our community engagement events. You help organize meetups, or you help guide the interns, you help do all these other things. These things do not make you a better engineer. I can't say you handle more difficult engineering tasks because of that, but that does make you more valuable to the organization. So the first few times this person did it, we just gave him a bonus, a great job, plus you get a bonus as if you're outperforming in your current role. After a while, given that he was doing this fairly consistently, we turned that bonus from a bonus to an allowance. If he did it one time, and great, this was a one-off event, you don't feel obliged to keep having to do this, chase this thing. You can just drop it and go back. Once it was clear that he was doing it consistently, then actually we know there's actually a job here. But rather than creating a new job role and a whole new job title for him, you just be like, yep, you're doing this, but with a plus on it. And that is part of your role that you're doing now. And even further, as this branch grew, and he was maybe not saying he was better as an engineer, but he was really doing a great job organizing and facilitating and getting events. That branches into a bigger role, let that job grow organically rather than having to make a big corporate decision about whether or not you need a developer relations role.
Level 5 bard, and I got to add one class in, I guess, fighter.
Yeah.
I think other people would call it shape, right? You have a spike strength and adjacent things you're good at. These people often struggle in organizations, right? In a small team, everybody understands they are quasi-generalists with some minor spikes. But then once you become an organization, like you said, it feels like these people can't get lost between departments, or they're doing a good job and people like them. The other departments like them because they're good to work with. But then in the core, they get dinged because the boss is, you're too distracted talking to other departments.
So just give you an example. Like some of the things I've seen be very weird is that like I had a bunch of, I think on one of the teams I was working with, a lot of the junior designers kept trying to go for conferences. And I was like, why do you keep putting up requests to go for conferences? I didn't understand. And then I went to look into it and I was like, oh, one of the criteria for being promoted to a more senior role was that you were more influential. And as an example they gave was like speaking at conferences. And so when you put that down, then the people will read that and be like, they have gone through previous performance cycles and been told according to this rubric. And this is what I mean by when performance gets disconnected from what you actually want from the org, it ends up being nonsensical. I'm very much against performance rubrics being written by people not running the team. I, as the person on the team, have a lot of things I need you to do. I want you to spend your time making sure these mocks are good, getting this thing pushed out, working with the engineers, building tooling so that we can automate some of this. There's tons of stuff I need you to do. And if I have a performance thing here on the side that's just like waving a carrot at you and getting you distracted, that's stupid.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting component which is about design, titles, and you started talking about promotion as well. And this is an example, you said, of designer trying to get promoted, and then there's some sort of it breaking down. Can you talk about over promotion?
Well, I think people have this conception. How would you describe this? Like, it is promotions in general are something to be celebrated, right? Obviously, it's good. You get paid more money. You get more responsibility. You generally feels good. I have found that like the fastest way to ruin somebody is to over promote them, because if you put them in a role where they are unable to meet expectations, then what happens is that you take a good job officer who's kicking ass at their current role, you put them in a place where there's higher expectations of them, and instead of them very confidently and calmly doing it, they are like really worried they're going to get fired anymore. Everyone's depending on them and they're upset they're not getting what they need from them. And yeah, they get a bit more money, which is nice. But from talking to people in these positions, like the money does not make up from like everybody, all your colleagues depending on you and being disappointed in you. It's tough. Promotions are not just about paying, they're about knowing who to give more responsibility to. Being given a responsibility that you're not ready to handle, fastest way to ruin someone. This is the framework. Someone's performance is one of the key factors necessary to decide whether to promote them. But the key thing to recognize is that you give someone a bonus for recognizing the work they have done. You give someone a promotion because you think they are going to be able to do good work going forward. Past performance is not an indicator of future performance, but to some degree it is.
Yeah.
So that is a key factor.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there are other things to consider, right? Like one simple mistake I used to make was that young, hardworking, capable officers doing a great job, and I just wanted to promote them quickly. I promoted them quickly, and then I did not realize that, yep, they were doing a great job, but whether it was luck, they were burning themselves out, or the opportunity was like all the stars aligned, and I had junior officers outperforming and senior officers underperforming, and they were very stressed about it, and that was really tough for everybody, including the team. So apart from performance, you want to look at consistency. You also want to look at whether or not you feel sustainable. If someone is achieving a high level of performance, but you look at them and you know they're burning out, they can't keep this running for years on end, you should not do it. You are just locking them into a job for a long time. And while they themselves will say, no, I really want that promotion. Actually, if you get the promotion, then they will think they want it, and then you promote them and they will get super stressed out. Instead of being at level and comfortably doing better, they are mostly at level, and if they slip up, they'll drop and they'll be underperforming. So yeah, apart from performance, you want to look at consistency, whether or not they're doing it sustainably. You want to look at whether or not they have the skills. Maybe in this scenario, they did well, but there's skills that you want to see for all people of this level, because there's other scenarios in the future. And very importantly, last one, I think is very critical, is do they have the right values? At the end of the day, the people you promote as leaders in your organization are going to be people that other people look up to. And so if this person is performing or behaving in a way that, even if it's very good, but you do not want other people to emulate, you probably should think twice about whether or not you want to promote them. I think that's a difficult conversation to have. You're doing great work, but the short answer is that I don't think I want other people behaving the way you do. Not necessarily because they are behaving badly, just maybe the way they make decisions, maybe they're more rash than you would like, or maybe they're too conservative than you would like, or maybe they are prioritizing the optics of it more than delivery, or maybe they're optimizing delivery without sufficiently care. But fundamentally, you do not want other people to copy their behavior. Don't promote. Yeah.
I think it's a tricky one, right? Because promote me, otherwise I might quit. If he got promoted, I should be promoted.
So I think in a lot of orgs, bad behavior trained into a lot of people in expectation set is that when you do not have good performance self-assessment, promotions are something you grab onto. If you're not measuring, no one's paying attention, someone got promoted to director, and as long as they don't do anything obviously bad, they just float around in that role because you're not assessing them for performance. And I think for people who are in organizations like that, and for people who've grown up in organizations like that, it makes a lot of sense to think, if I make the sale, made a pitch, works hard, I should be in this role, you get a promotion, and I'm happy. In a high-performing org, you need to continually assess performance. People see the upside of promotion, which is that I've got this thing that I own, but they don't see that actually just comes with a lot of responsibility that you are now burdened with. One of the things that we've been trying to do a bit more, I haven't fully fleshed out or rolled out yet, is promotion options. Meaning, rather than saying, I've decided you're promoted, is we think you have the capability to get promoted, so you feel you have it, but you must acknowledge you want it and know that you want to do it. And one of the things that I am thinking about, I haven't rolled out, is instead of saying you must take this promotion now, we think you're ready. You can take it now if you want, or maybe the offer stays for a year or two. That way people can feel, rather than from a place of anxiety, grabbing onto something, really reflect on whether this is something they want to do, something more they want to take on. Yeah.
I think that takes a lot of self-awareness, right? For people to be like, I'm ready from an organizational perspective, but maybe I'm not personally ready. You mentioned you notice burnout in your teams because people are pushing themselves. Could you share more about that?
Burnout is a big topic for different places. What I'm sharing is just one dimension. A simple way to burn someone out is to give them a lot of responsibility and feel like they have no choice but to keep doing it. They come in doing well as a junior officer, you promote them, they learn a bit, they're growing, they promote them. But at some point, they work harder and harder. I've had conversations with officers who say, Hong, I am working as many hours a week as I can, but I'm not getting promoted. What more do you want from me? For this officer, promotion means quantity of work. I'm already doing maximum quantity of work. How come this is not reasonable? And I had to explain to them, the fact is that if I promote you now, like I know you're achieving good work and I know you're delivering well, but if I promote you, then you are going to have to work these hours forever. What I actually want you to do is I need you to take a step back, build skills, get to a place where you can deliver similar levels of impact without having to max out your day. And that means you are going to take some of the hours that you are spent working on deliverables for me and focus on your development and skills. And then over time, you will grow. Because if every promotion means adding 2 hours to your workday, you run out of hours quickly. The only way to grow is to build skills. But that means sacrificing some stuff in the short run. You don't want to lock someone into a position where they feel like, I am working all the time. I do not have space to breathe, to do different things, to build skills. They are locked in the short run. They may not, because they took that space to build and grow skills. They eventually overtook in their ability to deliver. Not because they're better, but because they had time and space to build skills. So I think that was one of the mistakes I made previously, which was I was too eager to promote officers because I thought they were doing good. I saw capable, excited, motivated junior officers I wanted to support, and I thought promoting them, I was supporting them, which to some degree is true. But when you lock them into this kind of, I am firing on all engines state, and your engines are eventually going to burn out. So yeah, I think that was one of the challenges. And that's just for the individual, not counting the dysfunctional team where I'm expecting this guy to be a senior engineer, but he's not performing, he's really not delivering, and then this person gets very anxious, and then that creates more tension team. I think that's a whole separate issue. This might seem obvious, but it is better to have a team of outperformers than underperformers. And I know people might think yes, but if everyone's performing at a certain level, you want everyone to be at least comfortable and maybe half or even 75% of the time spiking up and out delivering. Everyone's great. Everyone knows what to expect from each other and people are positive. Versus if you took those same people and then put them at this level, then actually what used to be a very happy thing where, yeah, it's a little frustrating and promoted, but everyone's out delivering and expectations. Everyone's here and then people start letting each other down. And the fact is that people's performance is not exact. You will have years where you do really well, and you will have years where you don't do so well. That's life. There will be cycles where you do amazingly and cycles where things don't come together. If I put you at your peak, you're going to spend all your time worrying about when you drop from there. If I put you at like where you are solidly at, and you go up, that's why I think that you have a much healthier team that way. When you tell this to officers, however, and tell them this philosophy while explaining that's why you're not promoting them, they get obviously not very happy. But I have found that it's a discipline I need to keep, because otherwise when you promote everyone, everyone's very happy at promotion time, but then the team is not living up to the expectations. This person's meant to be a senior product manager, but doesn't even know how to do these things. Better to have a team of outperformers.
In your LinkedIn writing, you wrote about having to make a decision about performance standards, right?
Yes.
Whether it's better to set it too high or better to set it too low. And so I'm just curious how you think about that.
Standards are a mechanism, the thing people need to get away from, and that is very tempting, is there's no universal truth to what the right standards are. There really isn't. There is no sort of fundamental particle of software engineering. There is no fundamental unit of this. It's just what you and your organization need. Setting standards is a steering mechanism given what is available in the market. If you're a big tech company, you can look at market standards, hire people accordingly and go from there. But even among big tech companies, they're all slightly different. So you need to understand that what you expect from people is going to require some learning, some deviation, and some training when they come in. As you set standards, the question is not a philosophical one of what does it mean to be a senior engineer? It is a very practical one of I have this role needs these skills. You want to call it a senior engineer, a staff principal, a junior engineer, whatever, that's not really relevant. Who do I need? Who are the kind of people in the market who could be able to fulfill this role and bring them in? If you set the standard too low and you bring in people who actually aren't able to deliver what you need, then obviously that's problematic. But if you set standards too high, and it's very tempting to be as an org, like, oh, I have very high standards, and you can't bring in people, that's also a failure. The common term is chasing unicorns, right? Maybe they just don't exist. You need to hire the best you can, but the can part is bearing a lot of weight. What I found to be a very useful way to think about this is sometimes after doing this cycle a few times, you realize that actually this concept you have for a role is just wrong. It's too much to expect from one person. So I give you an example. We have a corporate team which does a bunch of stuff, including obviously HR and finance, but also people who just make sure that our office is working and make sure that our lights are on. I used to imagine there was this role of this person who would be responsible for our software and software support, meaning their job be to make sure that we had a good office, which was nice and cozy and well designed for people to come in and work and collaborate, but also make sure all our software tools that all the people on the team used were working very well, and make sure that your Gmail was working correctly, our Slack was working correctly, your messaging and whatever tools were working correctly. And because I was like, yeah, you have the production side of the house, which writes the software that we give to our people. And then you have the person here who's responsible for making sure that our own house is in order, which makes sense. But practically speaking, finding someone good at office space design and enterprise software configuration is not reasonable. They'll try their best, but they need two different kinds of people for these roles. Obviously, it would be nice if designers who could do all the design, but also write their front end for themselves. And there are people who can do that, but people who are really good designers and front-end engineers are very rare. Finding someone who can do both is even more rare. Designing your org around assuming you can get a lot of them is just stupid. You need to design your organization with consideration of the availability of material. And so, yeah, you could write this like fantasy description of a product manager who is super good engineer, super good designer, super sharp with marketing and business development. You can write your fan fiction of what this will look like. But if they don't exist, that's all it is. I think that is one of the difficult parts I've had to learn, trying to figure out, you want to scope roles up enough that you are putting the right pressure on people to deliver what you know is possible, but also make sure you're grounded in reality. I'm not like putting together roles that are just not practical to fill.
It's creating a system of checkpoints for performance, high performers, low performers. There's a story because sometimes we hire those superstars and we expect them to be superstars throughout, but it doesn't really work out. You hire them, onboard, train them. How do you think about bringing in more diverse talent through this structured performance review, compensation, optionality process? Why don't we talk about people of different skills first? When coming in, is there situations where you're like, okay, this person's going to be a rock star? How do you see that?
I think calling people rock stars and relying your strategy on rock stars is a mistake. Not to say there aren't very capable people who are very good at things, but if you are saying that, oh, they're just like that because they're rock stars. No, you need to be able to articulate what it is they are doing that lets them be so good at their job rather than just hand-waving it as, oh, that guy's magic. First, understand, at least in theory, what is your theory of a well-performing team? If you don't have that theory, everything is lost. For OGP, our well-performing team theory is you need PM, hopefully with some experience. Fresh PMs tend not to do that. One designer, still need some experience, though it's not as critical as for the PM. You need one experienced engineer to anchor the team, and then you can have a few junior engineers under them, 5 people. And that is, as a stereotype, as a reference, like a starter product team which can run something in production without everything blowing up on you immediately. They may not be able to do super complicated products, but as a basic product run, that's about right. Once you have that framework in mind, you start hiring. You're like, okay, I PM and designer. Then you see, do I maybe need 2 designers? Maybe the space we're in is more design heavy. In big tech, normally you have about PM to like 8 to 12 engineers. For us, it's 1 to 3. This is a much higher PM to end ratio. But that makes sense because our products are smaller, but we have a much more complicated bureaucratic environment to deal with, right? If I previously tried to have 1 PM to 10 engineers, didn't work out well for me because you have all these engineers running around building things that you didn't really need to build. And then the PM wasn't able to support them and put enough things in front of them, and you just get blocked by enough bureaucratic blockers that all your 10 engineers get choked anyway. We did this for a while. And then I realized, as I applied FormSG, for example, right? FormSG is our form building tool for government. What started happening was that the PM and the engineers and designers started spending all their time answering user support queries and just teaching people to onboard, and they weren't able to do what they wanted to do, which was engineering and product design. When a team is small, absolutely, engineers and PMs should help people on board so they know their users. But once you've got 50,000 government forms on a platform and 1,000 government officers making new forms every day, a team of 5 is just going to get buried in that. We came up with a new role called product operations. It wasn't me who came up with it. We hired a couple of people on board during COVID who were helping out with various things. They're just volunteering from the agencies. I didn't even have a word for it yet. That seems useful. Can you do that for this team too? They were the first of what became product operations. There was this role that you could see forming. We put a person there, and that's how you came up with that position. And so we now have like a couple dozen product operations officers doing this. And we had to hire people from very different backgrounds to come to this. You got people from other ministries and other government agencies. You got people from, obviously, delivery companies and SIA, and they all have very different backgrounds, but you know what you wanted and you were trying to form up the role. So for the first year or so when it was around, it wasn't very clear. People were just helping out with it, but as time went on, you crystallize what you need and codify it. The whole point of that story is that it is a much more empirical, hands-on process to design these things rather than a theoretical one. I don't think you can sit in a room, meditate, and be like, these are the 5 elements that we need to put together to form Captain Planet. You need to actually have some sense of the mix, go out, try it, and correct as you go.
No, it's really good because the crux of it is that we need to figure out what makes team actually perform, right? And rock stars are not independent of it, and we can't prejudge a rock star's trajectory.
I think intelligence is important, but I put a lot less weight on intelligence than I do nowadays.
Yeah.
I think if your organization as a whole does not really know what it's doing, and that means every scenario and every situation very ambiguous and vague, then obviously someone with very high intelligence will go there, figure out this new puzzle every time and do reasonably well. But the clearer you are around what you need to do, actually I found that, yeah, you have some people who are really intelligent versus someone who's just really, really clear about what they're trying to execute with a team and really have the right values and just trying to be helpful wherever they can. And they tend to do pretty well too. Yeah, like there will obviously be people who are very talented as a whole, but if your entire strategy is relying on like just generic rock stars, your organization strategy probably isn't well defined.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is you mentioned right games and wrong games. Will you share more about that?
This is something I've been wanting to write about, but I haven't quite crystallized it yet. So I apologize if it's not fully cogent. You see a lot of organizations and teams where they want to be high performing, right? And they'll try this strategy of let's go really consumer centric, or they'll focus on enterprise systems, or let's go to the cloud, or let's build platforms. And they'll keep fussing around at the strategic level, where actually the problem is that they haven't invested enough in their capabilities to deliver. No shade on Singapore, but I don't think anyone would disagree that if we had a Premier League team play against a Singapore team, they would destroy us no matter what strategy we played. Not saying our guys aren't good, but they are just way better. They can play 4-4-2, 4-3-3. They can play whatever, and they would probably just destroy us. The strategy is not going to make a difference if there's such a wide gap in capability. And then the question is, all right, why is there a gap? The short answer is that because that's where all the money is. Because the English Premier League, there's a ton of money there. If you want the best soccer players, go there to play for the teams. There's a lot of pressure and all the things to try really get you to perform is there. And not to say that our team doesn't train hard, but yeah, the kind of accountability and support and pressure on that is literally several orders of magnitude different. And so when you view it this way, actually what I find is that for a lot of people trying to get their org to perform, they're spending all their time thinking about, should we do this? Should we do that? And actually the problem is that they haven't built enough capability. And some try to build up capability, but it's tough because they haven't set up the right accountability structures. I've spoken to people trying to teach full stack engineering, agile development, or we're trying to teach people to change how they do product requirements or something like that. And you can try to tell people to train all these things, but without the accountability structure, without the pressure for them to do, they're like, okay, don't get me wrong, that's nice, but of all the things I need to do, that's really not a priority right now, because if my priority is not building capability, my priority is just like doing whatever my boss is angry at me for most recently, then I'll just do that. For different teams, I start from accountability. Even before changing anything else, I'm not giving any direction, I'm not giving any strategic shifts, everyone just continue their work as normal. The first thing I'm going to do is just make sure I get visibility into what we're delivering, then define a few metrics and a few goals in collaboration with the team. Okay, this is where we are. I am clear on that now. And this is what I'm going to hold us accountable to. Once you have that, you are not expecting the team to dramatically improve overnight. Putting pressure on people itself does not suddenly make them transform. But that visibility over time then allows you to start saying, okay, given that we're not doing these things well, what I need to fix, managing our deployments or testing before we roll out. We don't know how to do that. So when I say, okay, let's build those capabilities, because it's anchored in accountability, sticks a lot better. And once you've got the accountability that lets you build the capability, then you can start. And once you're comfortable having all those skills up, then you can talk about strategy. So to your point, it is not that you're choosing the wrong strategy, it's that you're playing the wrong game. You're spending all your time fussing around at this strategic level of, oh, should we do this? Should we go consumer-centric, developer-centric, or enterprise-centric, or whatever? But do you have this capability to execute on that? And if you do, great. But if you don't, you need the right accountability structures in place. The reason there's so much talent in AI right now is because there is a lot of money in it. And not just a lot of money, but very importantly, there are a lot of measurement mechanisms to evaluate the quality of models. Now, we can talk about the sort of business viability stuff later, and that one is completely complicated. But it is very clear when a model is performing better than other models, and there's a lot of money incentivized to do. So therefore, all the talent who could do it and all the techniques and pressure to do it go there, and therefore you have different strategies that they're playing, but only because you have those fundamentals. Yeah.
Last question from me is, we're talking a little bit about AI. Are there any AI tools you've been playing with or models?
Everyone on the team uses AI somewhat, quite organically actually, we didn't even have to push everyone to do it, just because if you're an engineer, you naturally come across this stuff, it makes your job easier. When the designers are starting to use some tools as well, I was mucking around with Cursor, both for coding as well as for writing a little bit. I found that it's pretty good at very basic engineering tasks, but it tends to stumble on more complex ones, which makes sense. But for writing, it's basically useless. It can generate content, but the models are bad at writing information-dense material. So yeah, I tried it out, but ultimately I just give up because I have to rewrite everything it does anyway. My view of it is that I think it's a useful tool, but at least my experience with my teams is that when the teams are very clear when there's a lot of pressure and accountability to deliver, they naturally find tools to help them. I don't need to do anything. Whereas I think if you're going around just being like, everybody in the company is going to use AI because I say so, that's trying to force capability. But actually the problem is that maybe there isn't the right accountability on the right deliverable. So that's why they're not bothering. Because if AI was useful, I found that it tends to happen quite organically.
Amazing. Love the right to mix things up by summarizing takeaways. Thanks for sharing about performance. A very good way of defining what is performance at an individual level, at a team level, at an organizational level, at a North Star level, but also how it gets lost in communication, mechanisms or dynamics. Thanks for sharing your mechanisms and systems, performance review, promotions, financial compensation levers to get the right outcomes and deliverables, keep individuals alive, productive, happy, and not burned out. A good holistic view. Thanks for sharing your learning journey. I like the part where you talked about the scope role, having the perfect office designer and the perfect enterprise software manager. It's a difficult combination, but that was nice to hear some of that personal learning journey as a leader.
Thanks for having me. I find these things like they're interesting to me, so I hope other people find them useful.
I found it interesting, and there's a few things I can tweak on my end as well.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Good to see you again.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.